This week I was watching a YouTube video of I don't know if you've seen these mudslides that are happening in Indonesia, but when I finally got unmuted the sound, it was a video that was taken on somebody's cell phone, and there's a river of mud flowing through this town, and houses, at this moment that they're taking the video, houses are breaking apart and tumbling into this river of mud. It's almost hard to imagine the scene, but and when the sound came on, I realized that the man that was taking the video and other people who are with him are shouting, and you don't know it's not a language that I could understand, but towards the end of the video, you can discover why they're shouting, because over on the other bank, somebody's there in one of the houses or like walking along the bank, and they can see it. From their perspective, they can see that the land is tumbling into this river of mud and the houses are going with it. And they're shouting at this person because they can see the incredible danger. That person can't see it. He thinks he's walking on solid land, but any minute that whole section of land can just tumble into that river. And so they're shouting at him, watch out, it's so dangerous. So this week it occurred to me that a presidential inauguration can kind of be like a mudslide, because so much changes so fast. You know, what you thought was one way, all of a sudden it just changes. And whether you voted for President Trump or not, you just couldn't help but feel that so many executive orders, one after another. And I think just everybody kind of had the same feeling, like, I hope it's a good thing. I hope it works. I hope not too many people get hurt. We just don't know what's going to happen with foreign relations or the economy or just environment. There's a whole lot of things that everybody just wonders about. We don't really have the whole picture. We don't really see everything, but we just kind of see a lot of stuff happening, and we just kind of hope everything's going to be okay. So that's when we feel like that, the Bible uses this image of a landslide or a mudslide where, therefore, though the earth should change and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, yet we will not fear. So this morning I want to focus on the topic of practically speaking, what does it mean, or what does it look like to take refuge in God? How do you do that? What does it mean to take refuge in God? We know what it is to feel anxious about things that are happening around us. We feel it. We feel the uneasiness in our lives, our personal lives, in our nation and the world. We feel those things. What does it mean then to take refuge in God? How do we do that? The Lord is our refuge and our strength. So I want to focus on verse 7 of what is in your bulletin and what Lois read to us, where it says, "How priceless is your unfailing love, O God. People take refuge in the shadow of your wings." How priceless is your unfailing love, O God. People take refuge in the shadow of your wings. Now, when David says, how priceless is your unfailing love, when he says that, that's really kind of like a summary statement. It's summarizing verses 5 and 6. What you see there is kind of the extended version of God's love. And so in verse 7, he's just kind of summarizing what's so priceless is your unfailing love. But he's summarizing verses 5 and 6. And so what you see in verse 5, it says, your love, Lord, that is Yahweh, your love reaches to the heavens, your faithfulness to the skies. Now, those are words that we hear a lot. Maybe it just kind of doesn't sink in right away what it means, but it's actually really significant because when David couples together God's steadfast love and his faithfulness, those are the two key characteristics of our covenant God. There's a place in Exodus chapter 33 where Moses says to God, God, show me your glory. And God says, okay, I'll show it to you. And this is what God reveals to him. This is God answering Moses' request. This is what I am. This is what I'm like. I am your covenant God. I am a God who makes promises to you, and I keep them. I'm a God of love, and I am a God of faithfulness. I never stop keeping my promise to you. So that's what David's referring to here when he says, your steadfast love is priceless, O God. He's really saying that covenant love with which you love your own people is priceless to us. So for example, if you remember that scene, that place in Exodus chapter 6 where Moses is under so much pressure because he's gone to release the people. He's gone to tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And Pharaoh just makes all the oppression 10 times worse on the people. And so Moses is really under enormous amount of stress. And he cries out to God and he says, I don't know why you sent me here. You haven't rescued these people at all. And, their problems are just worse because I came. And into that situation, God basically says to Moses, now you're going to see what I'm going to do. And this is what I want you to tell the people. I have heard their groaning, and I have remembered my promise. I've remembered my covenant. That's it. That's the key. This is who God is. This is what you have to know. This is what in the most stressful moments, that's what you have to know. That's who God is. So the main point that I want to make in the sermon today is simply this, that because the love of God, that hesed, it's called hesed in Hebrew, is so priceless to us, therefore we take refuge under the shadow of God's wings. It's because of his love. That's why we can take refuge in the shadow of his wings. So, verse 7, how priceless is your unfailing love, O God. People take refuge in the shadow of your wings. So this morning, I just want to take a look at what does it look like, practically speaking, to take refuge in the shadow of God's wings. How do we do it? And I'm going to mention 4 things. And the first one is simply, we don't run away from reality. Often in our lives, it feels like we are bombarded with negative things, scary things, bad things. Sometimes they come one after another. There's so many of them. Like you could have a day where just so many bad things happen, you just feel beat up. Like I had too much bad news today. And then we just add more to it. We turn on the TV, But it's like, we know that feeling where it's like you're being bombarded with bad things. And it really can be a temptation for us to give in, to give up, to quit. But I want you to listen to Psalm 11, which is a psalm that basically David wrote on such an occasion where somebody was telling him to give up, telling him to quit. But listen to what he says in Psalm 11. Verse 1 is the introduction, and then the quotation comes after that. So this is what he says. In the Lord I take refuge. How then can you say to me, quote, flee like a bird to your mountain? For look, the wicked bend their bows. They set the arrows to the strings to shoot from the shadows at the upright in heart. When the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? Now, David wrote that psalm because he's tempted to give up, because people are telling him to give up. It's all lost. It's all a waste of time. It's not going to work. Now, as you know, David suffered an enormous amount of opposition, but he never gave up. King Saul was hunting him like a dog, and he was using the full power of the military to come after David. But David never gave up. He never stopped trusting the promises that God had made to him and believing God's going to do it. God is going to come through. That's why when he had the chance to kill Saul, he didn't do it. That would have been giving up. That would have been taking a shortcut. Nope, he would not do that. He remained faithful even then. So in the same way, the first thing that needs to be said about taking refuge is simply don't give up. And yet, I think it helps to remember this, that you don't see the whole picture, all right? So on a day when a lot of things are going wrong, there's a lot of fear in your heart and a lot of trouble. You got to know that you're only seeing a part of the picture, right? We're seeing a bad day, we could say. All right, I'm having a bad day today. That's part of the picture. But God is, I'm not going to give up because I know that God has made promises to me and I'm going to trust them. That's the first one. We just got to kind of say, all right, I'm not going to give up. This is the reality, and this is what I have to deal with. I'm going to just stop this from dinging a minute. There we go. Okay. So secondly, the second essential component, after we think about, I'm not going to give up because I know God is in control, the second essential component of taking refuge in God is that you have to see what the real problem is, and you have to see it clearly. So here, the scripture that I'm going to read to you is Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. This is what it says in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. All right? We think we know what the enemy is, but the enemy is way bigger than we thought it was. We live in a fallen world. The real enemy is sin and the devil. Spiritual forces of evil. Now, we live in a country that has a democracy, and so we get to vote for whichever candidate we think is going to do the best job. But the bottom line is that ultimately, if you're a Christian, if you're a believer, you know that our hope is not in a human being. We try to, it's not like we stick our head in the sand. We certainly try to make the best vote that we can make. We try to think about it. We try to deal with reality. But in the end, if you're a believer, okay, my trust is not actually in a political candidate. My trust is in the Lord. My trust is in God. So that's so important to know. I live in a fallen world, and I need to trust God. So in Psalm 36, David begins like this. This is what Lois read to us. It's printed in your insert. I have a message from God in my heart concerning the sinfulness of the wicked. There is no fear of God before their eyes. In their own eyes, they flatter themselves too much to detect or hate their sin. The words of their mouths are wicked and deceitful. They fail to act wisely or do good. Even on their beds, they plot evil. They commit themselves to a sinful course and do not reject what is wrong. Now, when we read that, of course, the first thing that we think of is somebody else, somebody that I can think of that I'm talking about. But the interesting thing here is that when David says there is no fear of God before their eyes, which, folks, that's the root of all evil right there, is when you say in your heart, there is no God, or it doesn't matter what I do, God doesn't see. That's the beginning of the end right there. And that is the very line that Paul pulls out of David's psalm and mentions in Romans chapter 3, verse 18. There is no fear of God before their eyes. And you know who he's talking about? He's talking about you. He's talking about me. He's talking about the universality of sin. There's no fear of God before their eyes. This is the problem. Everybody's got this. This is the great danger. And this is what you have to see. If you are going to take refuge in God, you've got to know what the problem is. Nobody takes refuge when they don't see what the problem is. Have you ever been out at Sandy Hook when the lightning is coming down? This has happened to me many times, probably because I go there so many times. But sometimes these electrical storms will come in from the ocean, and you see the bolts of lightning coming down and hitting the water all around. I mean, like not just one or two, but lots of them. You can see it. And if you've ever been out there when electrical storm like that comes to Sandy Hook, what you do not do is you do not think to yourself, well, that's just out there. I'm sure over here on Sandy Hook, it'll be okay. Right? That's a mistake that almost nobody makes. I mean, maybe once in a while somebody makes that mistake, but you know that there is so much electricity up in those clouds that you do not want to go for a walk on the beach at that time. You're like a lightning rod. And that's the first thing that you have to understand. If you're really going to take refuge in the Lord, you got to know, I'm like a lightning rod. I'm a sinful human being, and I live in a sinful world. There is so much danger to me all the time. I have got to take refuge in the Lord. You know, the reason that King David was the greatest king that Israel ever had, apart from Jesus, is because when everything went bad for him, when he fell into sin, he said to God, before you and you only have I sinned. Right? He made that confession. That's why he's a great king. He knew this is not the time for a great cover-up. This is a time to admit what I did and receive forgiveness of God. And the reason that King Saul is one of the worst kings that Israel ever had and got rejected by God as king over Israel is because when he sinned, he wouldn't admit it. He wouldn't take his refuge in God. So that's the second important aspect or element of taking refuge in God. You got to see things as they really are, because you are a lightning rod. So you got to just know that I've got to take refuge here. So that brings me to the third essential step in taking refuge in God, and that is to keep Jesus always before your eyes, because he's the real answer to our real problem. Jesus is the answer. Now, everybody knows that, but that's so essential in actually taking refuge. If you're really going to find refuge, you've got to keep Jesus always before your eyes. Have this memory of when, it's about 30 years ago now, but Chia and I went up to visit my mom and dad, and we went up into the Adirondack Mountains because my dad had this trail that we were going to hike that led back into a place called the Ausable Club, and it's just beautiful back in there. So we were walking along a gravel road, and we'd been walking for about an hour, and we could all of a sudden start to hear the thunder approaching. And, there's nothing. You're just in the woods, you're just in the mountains there. And so we started talking like, what are we going to do if it rains, you know? And it was too late to turn back. So we just kept on walking, and then a few drops started to fall. And just then, as we came around a bend in the road, all of a sudden there, of all things, in the middle of absolutely nowhere, was a bulldozer. And the bulldozer had one seat, and over the seat it had like a small steel roof, like mostly to protect you from falling trees, that kind of a thing. Well, just then the thunder, the lightning struck, and all four of us ran to the bulldozer, and kind of like squeezing clowns into a Volkswagen, we all got into that seat and squeezed in under that little tiny roof, and the heavens just opened up and it poured rain. I mean, it was like sheets of water on all four sides. I mean, it's the kind of thing that you could put your hand like this and it was pouring water on you. And it was just the strangest sensation to take refuge together with, three other people, luckily people that we knew pretty well, underneath that shelter of that roof. Folks, this is what it's like to put your faith in Jesus. There is nothing else anywhere. There's only one thing that can protect you from everything, and that is Jesus. This is what the woman who had lived a sinful life found out. If you remember, Jesus was reclining at the table at the home of Simon the Pharisee. And the woman, it says the woman who had lived a sinful life in that town. In other words, everybody knew it. Everybody knew who she was. Well, that woman, that one that everybody knows, came into the house, went up to Jesus, began weeping, washing his feet with her tears, drying them with her hair, and then had an alabaster jar of perfume and began to anoint his feet with the perfume. Now, when that happened, of course, it was an uncomfortable situation. Everybody is looking like this is so inappropriate. First of all, that woman should not be in here and doing that to Jesus. And second of all, Jesus shouldn't be letting her do that to him. It's all bad all the way around. And yet, the point of the story, the reason it's included in the scriptures, is because we know that what that woman found out was that not only was she doing exactly the right thing, taking refuge in Jesus, but she was doing what everybody else needs to do. Jesus basically rebuked Simon, She's just giving thanks for the forgiveness of her sinful life. You have not shown any thanks at all because you are not yet forgiven of anything in your sinful life. Folks, that's how it is. The sin is like right there. It's just right outside the window. But there's refuge in Jesus. If you come under his protection, you are covered. Everybody has what we would call an unpayable debt. We can't pay it ourselves, only taking refuge in Jesus. That's why it's such a relief. That's why you can say, I know that it's true, all the sin of my life, but I also know that I am forgiven. That's refuge. That's true refuge. It changes everything about how you live your life. When Jesus healed the man born blind, if you remember, there was a lot of political pressure on him. It was a politically charged situation at that moment. And, politics confuses us, right? We don't, we kind of know like that's not right, but is that right? It's just confusing to us when there's a lot of, we can feel it. It's politically charged. And if you just say, well, I totally am, 100% a Democrat, not quite sure that's right. But if you just say, well, I'm 100% a Republican, not quite sure that's right. That's because those are just human things. It's Jesus in whom we take refuge. And if you remember, so into that political situation, they were telling the man who had been healed of his blindness, give glory to God and say that Jesus is a sinner. Right? That was what he needed to do to be politically correct. If you just open your mouth and just say, Jesus is a sinner, everything will be okay. All right, so just say it, okay? Just say it now in front of everybody. Just say it. And he said, well, this was his answer. Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. But one thing I know, I was blind, but now I see. Folks, that's what it is to take refuge in Jesus. I don't know about that. I don't know about that. One thing I know is that I'm under the roof. My sins are forgiven. My sins are taken away. That might not be very politically correct, but I love Jesus. I need him because that's the only way I'm going to make it. That's the only way I'm going to make it to heaven. That's the only way I'm going to make it through today, is Jesus. So let me go to the last essential step in taking refuge in the Lord, and that is to hold fast to him in faith and obedience. It's so easy to let your heart get so full of other worries and other troubles that you feel like you have no refuge at all. And that is a terrible feeling when you're just overwhelmed. Folks, it can happen to the best Christians where you just get overwhelmed. It's like an avalanche. There's so many things to worry about. There's so many troubles in your life. But this is what we have to do. You have to put your trust in him. You have to practice trust. You have to practice obedience. You just have to say, look, this is where I stand. I am going to trust in him. Have you ever heard of catastrophizing? Catastrophizing is where whatever happens, you immediately see the worst case scenario. So it's always when you, I Googled it. Let me just read what Wikipedia said. Catastrophizing is a thought pattern that involves focusing on worst case scenarios and believing the worst will happen. It can lead to feelings of anxiety, depression, and stress. All right? So that's what artificial intelligence is telling us is catastrophizing. But it knows that because so many people know what it is, because so many people have experienced it. That's what happens when we just kind of look at the world around us and it builds up and it's overwhelming. And it does lead to depression. It does lead to anxiety because everything that happens, you immediately say, oh, I know what's going to happen now. And you just see the worst case scenario. And let me tell you, you get better at it as you get older because you've seen a lot of bad things happen. When you're young, you haven't seen that much bad happen, so you just think, well, what's the worst that could happen? But if you're old, you say, well, lots could happen because I've seen it. Catastrophes can happen. Disasters can happen. Well, folks, this is what it means to take refuge. When you feel like you're kind of getting up to the boiling point where there's just so many worries, that's the time when you got to just say, look, now is the time to trust in the Lord. You take a deep breath, you put your faith in Jesus, and you pray, and you just tell him, Lord, I trust you. Right outside this roof, it's raining, it's pouring. I don't know what the answers are, but I know that you are in control, and I put all my trust and all my hope in you.